Mr. Edward Darling of Sparta, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Darling, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in my parents' farm home on 8 Mile Road and Fruit Ridge in Alpine Township, June 20th, 1924.
All right. Now, did you stay on that farm while you were growing up?
Yes. Growing up, I worked on the farm until I was old enough to work for other people. And at 25 cents an hour working for other people, it sounded pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So I did quite a bit of that for quite a few years, actually, until my age made me eligible for the draft board to start hounding me. And I got three deferments after that, and finally it got to be more hassle than I thought it was worth to get the deferments. So I just didn't bother to get the final deferment, and I got a cute little letter from the government. Greetings, you are ordered to report.
Okay. Now, what did it take to get a deferment? What did you have to do?
I am not totally sure. All I had to do was have the man I worked for answer all the questions that the draft board asked him.
Okay.
And at that age, I wasn't too concerned with the questions. Something about they had to have a certain amount of points
Mm-hmm.
with the draft board in order to get their employees deferred.
All right. Now, were you doing farm work all this time?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that probably had a lot to do with it, because that was one area of work where
Yes.
one could get deferments. All right. Now, how long did you stay in school?
Halfway through the 9th grade,
And then why did you leave?
because I got sick and disgusted with school. I wanted to be out in the open and
Mhm.
doing things.
All right.
Like a dumbhead, I didn't realize what it was going to do to me down the road.
Right. Now, what kind of farming were you doing?
Mostly general farming. The last two jobs I had, one was for a potato grower, and the other one was for an apple grower. I worked for the apple grower at the time that the German prisoners were billeted here in Sparta, and they had a dozen or so German prisoners that did all the gut work. I drove the tractor and hauled the apples into the storage and whatnot.
Did you have any contact with the Germans?
Not personally, no, other than to see them, but I didn't try to carry on a conversation with them or anything.
Okay.
I figured the boss man wouldn't appreciate that.
All right. That when the German prisoners were out there, did anybody guard them, or did they just go about their business and get in the truck and go away?
They pretty much went about their business and done what they were supposed to do. He would come up here to Sparta. They had the camp over on the east side of Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
He'd come up and pick them up every morning with his truck, and as far as I can remember, there wasn't anything involved in guards. There might have been at the camp, but not in transit back and forth to his farm.
Do you have any impression of sort of how old the soldiers were? I mean, were they regular military age, or?
A little older than I was at the time, however old I would have been in 1944. I'd have been 20, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
They were a little older than myself.
Well, quite likely they were taken prisoner maybe in North Africa or someplace like that, and so they...
I don't know if it was that or if it was actually in some of the earlier parts of Germany, but they were quite happy to be out of the range of gunfire and be here working. It's the way it seemed from their actions.
Okay. Now to back up a little bit, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was old enough to know what was going on when that happened.
Do you remember how you learned about it?
Oh boy. The first, I don't know. At my age, I guess it didn't make that big an impression on me. Let's see, Pearl Harbor was what?
41.
41. So I'd have been what,
17, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more about girls than I was Pearl Harbor. You aren't supposed to hear that, dear.
I didn't hear it.
All right. Well, so did you think probably if there was a war, it was going to be over before it would get to you? Or
I hoped so,
hmm
but that didn't happen.
Okay. Now, did you follow the news after that? Did you pay attention to what was happening in the war, or did you just kind of mind your own business and?
A little of each.
hmm
I know at the time that they dropped the atomic bomb, I was thinking, well, maybe that'll get this done so I don't have to go over there.
All right. And by the
Well,
time they did that, you were in the Army.
Yes, I was in basic training at the time they
Mhm.
did that. 15th of August, was it?
Yeah.
And I was in basic training from May to September. So I was in basic training then, and everybody kind of rejoiced. The town went crazy, and everybody was kissing everybody, and I didn't tell my wife about that, but that's okay. And of course, I always credited Harry Truman for dropping the bomb that saved my neck. They tell me over 1 million, now I don't know if they meant both U.S. and Japanese or just the U.S. They said over 1 million guys would have lost their lives, and I probably would have been one of them. So I always thanked Harry Truman for that, even though he did some other things that weren't quite so good.
All right. Let's see. You had mentioned you get drafted then in the spring of '45. Now, were you married at this time, or did you get married after you came
No.
back from the service?
I was free and didn't know enough to stay that way at the time. 2nd of May of '45, when was Easter in '45? I don't remember. I gave my wife an engagement ring on
Mhm.
Easter of '45, which happened to be April 1st.
Mhm.
So I told her it was an April Fool joke, and she took me seriously. But we didn't get married before I went overseas.
Mhm.
I came home and was home for 6 months before we got married. We got married in May of '47.
Okay. We'll back up again in your story. We get to the point when you get your draft notice.
Yeah.
Now, where did you report to then when you were drafted?
I can't remember the name of the building, but it was in the first block of Fulton Street, east of where the monuments are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so downtown Grand Rapids. And
Yeah.
Is that just? Did
Yeah,
you get a
there's
physical
some
there?
office building down there. You had to report to room such and so.
Right. Now, was that just for paperwork, or did you get a physical there, or?
That was the paperwork, and I was sent to Detroit for a physical,
Mm-hmm.
and unfortunately I passed.
Right.
And then 2 or 3 weeks later, I was sent to Fort Sheridan, Illinois for induction.
Okay. And again, was that just a stopover on the way to a training camp, or did you train at Fort Sheridan first?
No, this was just a assignment situation.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we took the step forward, we were told where we were going, and I was going to Little Rock, Arkansas, or Camp Robinson, Arkansas,
Mhm.
which is just out of Little Rock.
All right. Now, how did they get you down there?
A train,
Okay. Had you taken a long train trip before?
never.
Okay. So what was that experience like for you?
Well, I crossed the Mississippi River 4 times and never saw it. It was always at night.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a little discouraging, but as I look back, what difference does it make?
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, once you got down to Camp Robinson, what was that like?
Hot. And everybody welcomed the rain down there when we were out marching or anything, because it helped to cool you off. It was hot and dry, usually until it rained, and 20 minutes after it stopped raining, it was dry again.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't exactly fun, but it was better than training in Alaska.
All right. Now, what sort of guys were in there with you?
Mostly guys either a little younger or a little older, because about that point they were getting desperate enough that they were taking men with a couple of kids.
Mm-hmm.
So that brought in guys that were 4 or 5 years
Right,
older than
right.
me, as well as the greenhorns that had just turned 18.
Okay.
So
Now, yeah. And of course, by the time you're doing this, I mean, the war ended in Europe in May of '45, right after you got drafted. So why were they bringing in all the soldiers?
I always said that the Germans heard that I was drafted, so they gave up a week later.
Right.
But I don't know, unless it was all in dreadful anticipation of invading Japan. I don't know, other than that, why they kept on drafting him. Of course, the guys that were with me were in there the same as I was before the Germans surrendered.
Right,
Nobody knew exactly when they were going to surrender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Now, once you get there, now what does the training actually consist of? What do they have you do down there?
Mostly rifle training. I guess that's why I got the marksman's badge, because we had a lot of rifle training, some bayonet training, where you lunge at an officer with a bayonet on the end of your rifle, and you felt guilty to do it, but he would swear at you if you didn't do it, so you did. That and 10-mile hikes to get you physically adapted, and they kept you busy while you had free time, which always griped me. If you were there in camp on Sunday, you got put on some detail. So I'd get up early in the morning and take the first bus into Little Rock about 6 o'clock in the morning, and go to church, and then I'd go and get a meal and go and lay in MacArthur Park and sleep for 2 or 3 hours.
So that way they couldn't find you and assign you to anything else.
I didn't break any rules. It was my time.
Right,
I was allowed to go into town if I wanted to. But the unjust part of it was, if you preferred to just lay in your bunk all day, they wouldn't let you do that. They put you on some kind of detail, picking up cigarette butts or KP or who knows what useless stuff.
All right. Now, how did the drill sergeants treat you? Were they reasonably fair, or?
Depend on the personal opinions. You had days when you thought they were, you know what, and other days when they seemed reasonable. When you ask about that, to digress a little bit, one of the drill sergeants we had, he was a buck sergeant at the time that I was in Little Rock. And after I got over to Japan, had been there for almost a year, I went to visit a buddy in the hospital, and lo and behold, I run into this same sergeant there, and he was a master sergeant at the time, so he either knew somebody or he did something worthwhile.
All right, or maybe he got a job where it just came with being a master sergeant.
That could be.
All right.
You never know. A lot of it was connections. It isn't what you know, it's who you know.
Now, were you in pretty good shape when you went in, because you're doing all that farm work and so forth?
Yeah.
So you could hold up a little bit better to the physical training than some of the guys?
I did better than some of the city kids, yeah. The only problem I had, and of course I never could prove it and never tried to, on the rifle range, we had a day when we fired rifle grenades. It's a grenade contraption that fits on the barrel of your rifle. You pull a trigger and the grenade goes crazy. When it did that, I had the most terrible pain in my ear because the rifle was right here. And I never experienced anything. It hurt so, but fortunately it didn't last more than a few hours. And lo and behold, quite a few years ago, I had a lot of ear infections. I went to the ear doctor. He says, "Your eardrum is missing."
Oh.
And I always blamed that rifle grenade for exploding my eardrum. But at that point, years later, there wasn't anything I could do about it. But he took a little piece of skin off my earlobe and built me a new eardrum, and that stopped the ear infections, but it didn't help me hear any better.
Mhm.
I still can't hear worth a toot. I always have to put telephone on this side if I'm going to talk.
All right. Now, how long did the basic training process last?
From the dates are in there, I believe, from the 8th of May till, no,
Okay, well, it says you get to Japan. Okay, September 8th. That's May 14 to September 8th, it looks
okay,
like.
that's where the 8th
Yeah.
come into my mind.
Right. That's pretty good. Okay, so you get to spend the summer in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And then right when it might cool off eventually, you
Then I
leave.
got shipped around the country
All right.
because they didn't know exactly what to do with the people at that time because the war was over.
Mm-hmm.
And they shuffled you until they found something to do, or some big wheel decided what to do.
All right.
I went from the what do they call it? The leave that you have before going overseas,
Yeah,
after
furlough,
basic training. From that, they sent me to Fort Riley, Kansas. I was there about 3 days doing nothing, just waiting for paperwork. Then from there, they sent me to Camp Adair, Oregon, where I don't even remember doing anything worthwhile, but we were there for about a month. And then from there, they sent us, believe it or not, from Oregon, which is almost the top of the United States, to Camp Anza, California, which is almost spitting distance of the Mexico border.
Mm-hmm.
Hotter than the blazes there. And then from there, we went overseas.
All right. Now, what kind of ship did you travel in?
We traveled in, I forgot the name of the ship, but it was, I guess, a normal
Was it
ship. We were
a
the
regular-
first. We were the first troop ship to take the Greater Circle route,
Mm-hmm.
which went northwest out of Long Beach, California, and made a half circle on the globe and ended up in Yokohama.
All right.
And we watched the whales jump and all that good stuff all the way over there.
Yeah. What was the weather like on that trip?
Not too bad. It was the middle and late October, and the weather wasn't too bad. We had 1 or 2 rainy days, but nobody seemed to complain about the weather.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing they complained about was seasickness.
Right.
And down in the holds where they had the mess areas, it was stinky and stuffy and no air movement to speak of. They had huge, long metal table-like things for tray things for tables. It was just a narrow metal thing that was maybe 25, 30 feet long. Your trays would sit on there, and as the ship would roll, your trays would slide back and forth. And when one ended up in front of you, full of somebody's throwing up,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of made you think you were through eating.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, the trip wasn't bad.
Okay.
You were allowed on deck and get fresh air most of the time. We had nothing else to do.
Right. Okay. So then, when you do make it into Japan, what do you remember about? You go into Yokohama. Was that during the day when you went in?
No, it was dark. I don't know exactly what time it was, but it was dark, and of course they had limited power supply there, so it seemed exceptionally dark.
Mm-hmm.
And their living style being so much different than ours, it seemed really dingy and strange, but nothing evil came from it, fortunately, other than somewhere in the train trip from Yokohama to the town near the replacement center, my duffel bag come up missing.
Mm-hmm.
Never did find it.
All right. So did you get off the boat while it was still dark and then just get
Yeah.
loaded on the train? Okay, so
Yeah.
you really didn't see Yokohama at that point. You were
No.
just going on the train. Now, was the train kind of different from the American trains you'd been on at that point, or did it seem pretty much the same?
Yeah, they had piercing little whistles, and of course they were probably equivalent to trains that we had 75 years previous.
Mm-hmm. Did they still have steam engines, or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, smoked like crazy.
All right. Now, you went to a replacement depot then. How long did you stay there?
Too long. Of course, 10 minutes was too long.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say it was in the neighborhood of a week to 10 days.
Okay. And what sort of facility was it? I mean, what kind of housing did they have, or anything else?
20-man tents,
Mm-hmm.
no heat, no light, no running water, mud knee deep.
Mm-hmm.
It was another facet of not being prepared for the surrender
Mm-hmm.
at the time it came. It was just an unprepared situation. It couldn't be helped, I guess, and we lived through it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, when you do get assigned, what unit did you go to?
Well, I don't remember exactly. I think the first unit I was assigned to was the 4025th Signal Service Group. And while in serving in that, there wasn't anything really for us to do. So I think it was during that time that I drove Jeep for
Mm-hmm.
the officers that had to go to appointments and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I've often wondered if they couldn't handle a steering wheel, but that wasn't my decision.
All right. So you, tell me a little bit about that sort of duty. I mean, how did it work? What did you do?
Well, I drove different officers around to different buildings, wherever they told me to go.
Mm-hmm.
In a case like that, when you're a greenhorn, you do what you're told to do.
Right.
You never give it a second thought. But on one occasion, I remember, I had a nice captain to drive to somewhere or other, and he said, "Private, would you stop at this camera shop?" He says, I've got a camera question. I'd like to stop at this camera shop. Well, that was one of the few things that weren't off limits to the
Mm-hmm.
troops, so we stopped there. And he was looking at cameras, and I was looking at cameras, and I found a cute little camera. I should have gotten it out here so you could see it. I call it my spy camera.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a picture the size of a postage stamp,
Mm-hmm.
about not more than an inch square. And he said, "Would you like that?" I said, "Yeah, I was thinking about getting a price on it." He said, "Let me get it for you." So he was apparently accustomed to dickering with these people, and he got it for me, and I don't know what it cost him because he wouldn't let me pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the treasure souvenirs that I ended up with.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you remember anything much else about the other guys you drove around? I mean, were there any generals or things like that? Or
Nobody higher than captain.
Mm-hmm.
I had contact with some higher officers later on after I was put in the warehouse business, but no, I never drove for anybody higher than a captain.
Okay. Now, where?
Sometimes lower.
Okay. Now, where were you driving around? Just close to the base you were at?
City of Tokyo,
Okay.
wherever they told me to go.
All right. Well, what did Tokyo look like while you were driving around in it? What did you see there?
Well, there were areas that were not bombed to speak of. I guess well, in the first place, they had a strategic plan. Don't bomb anything that we may eventually have to use. Tokyo Central Station, which is comparable to Grand Central Station in Chicago, if you've ever been there, and everything was bombed out around the building the loading platform was still there, the tracks were still there, the building itself was still there, but everything else around it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they call strategic bombing. Those
Right.
guys were good.
Mm-hmm.
And areas that were anywhere in the neighborhood of industrialized places, there wasn't nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
It was just rubble. Everywhere you looked, it was just rubble. I got stuck driving truck before I was assigned permanently to the battalion, and there was a dozen or so Japanese men that shoveled the stuff onto the truck. We were cleaning it out of the streets,
Mm-hmm.
and one day they were working along there, and one of the shovels full of stuff that went into the truck, there was a hand.
Oh.
And I said to the guys, "This is enough, we're full enough, we go." And we left.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened after that to that particular spot. I never got back there.
Now, were there other parts of Tokyo that were in better shape?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Imperial Palace wasn't touched at all.
Mm-hmm.
The palace grounds covers quite a few acres.
Mm-hmm.
And the Diet Building, which was their White House,
Right.
and the building, I don't know what it was originally, that MacArthur used for his personal residence, those buildings weren't touched at all. They were up on the hill in a little bit secluded neighborhood, nowhere near anything industrial.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't harmed at all. The one St. Francis Xavier Church, where I went to church, the church was there. The rectory, living quarters of the pastor, right next door, completely gone.
Mm-hmm.
The school across the street, they had a huge school there, was completely gutted. Apparently an incendiary bomb. Everything was burned out of the inside of it, but the cement walls were still there and useless. They probably were bulldozed eventually, but I don't know. The interesting thing that happened to us Christmas Eve, I guess a few of us were sentimental enough that we wanted to go to church on Christmas Eve, not to an auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
So we got together and got permission from the captain and lined it up with the chaplain. And I, of course, had access to trucks at the time. I got one of the trucks, and about 15 or 20 of us piled in that truck, and we went out to St. Francis Xavier to church. When we walked into the church, custom there is the women and small children in arms were on one side of the center aisle. The men and larger children, male children, were on the other side of the main aisle. When we walked in there, those people all scurried out of their pews to the walls and kitty little dark corners wherever they could get. They thought it was a raid. And when we went in the pews and did what the other people in the pews would normally do, then slowly they came back to their pews. I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really sure what exactly would explain that or what experience that was based on, but yeah, that's got to be pretty striking as something.
Yeah.
Now, was the service conducted then in Japanese, or
Yeah.
are they still using Latin at that point because it was a Catholic church?
The main part was in Latin. The sermon, which nowadays they call homily, was in Japanese. So we didn't have to feel guilty leaving church because we didn't know what the hellfire and brimstone sermon was about.
You got there.
But we had several of us had acquaintances that went there to church, and we kind of got acquainted with Father Sato, and he got so that he could, through a phrase book, do a little conversation,
Mhm.
but nothing normal.
Okay. Now, did you, over the course of your time in Japan, did you have much dealings with Japanese people who could speak English? I mean, were there ones that you got to know at all or work with?
Uh, I didn't run into any Japanese civilians that were fluent in English.
Hmm.
I imagine there were some, but they weren't in my category.
Right. Okay. Now, you say at a certain point you switched from your original assignment to the 71st Signal Service Battalion. Well, what was it that the 4025 was supposed to do that they couldn't do? I mean, what was the difference?
Well, originally, the 4025th that I was originally assigned to was a mobile signal unit.
Hmm.
They had 8 trucks, all equipped with the mobile communications, the closed body trucks,
Hmm.
and those were trucks that had come up through the islands that they had used for mobile communications where other communications weren't available. And they had those because they didn't know the disposition of the Japanese citizenry.
Right.
They didn't know what was going to happen, so they had to be prepared with communications if emergency arose, which God bless it, it didn't.
Hmm.
We never had any, well, this was a United Nations force there, so there was soldiers from all different countries there. And one of the countries was Chinese. And the Chinese and Japanese have been bitter enemies for centuries. And there were a few beheadings took place there. And the area around Shimbashi, where the bad stuff happened, was placed off limits for U.S. personnel.
Hmm.
So we don't know from personal experience, only from what we read in the papers.
Did you have the impression it was the Chinese beheading the Japanese or the other way around?
I really don't know. The one big guy that worked for us, he apparently the people in the northern region of Japan, Hokkaido,
Hmm.
they are by nature larger people than the rest of them. As you go south, they get smaller for some reason. And he had been a sergeant in China or Manchuria
Hmm.
during that time that they were having their disagreements. And he was one of the best workers and best communicators. In fact, he was the one that got me the Noritake tea sets.
Hmm.
And he never elaborated on his experiences in China, and I never pressed.
Hmm.
So I didn't really have any good information on it. All I know was they were bitter enemies there, the troops that were in the occupation force.
Okay. Now, with the 71st Signal Service Battalion that you then joined, what was your job at that point?
The 71st came about because they no longer needed a mobile unit, and there were 2 or 3 mobile units that they put together, probably for easier paperwork or whatnot, I don't know. And it was named the 71st Signal Service Battalion. And we were, us guys that I was closely working with, were assigned to the battalion supply, which was nowhere near, about 5 miles from the main battalion base, because we had to have room enough warehouse-wise to take care of all this stuff. And the only place that the big wheels were able to find was an abandoned or not being used warehouse, lumber operation warehouse. They had 8 warehouses that had been formerly used for lumber distribution. It was in the bay, just across the canal from the city of Tokyo, but it was in the bay. The rumors had it that it had been a garbage dump, and eventually got above sea level, and they dumped a little dirt on top of it and made an island. But I don't know if that rumor was true or not. But anyhow, we had those 8 warehouses and trucks and equipment, high-lows and whatnot, to operate the supply base, because we had all the supplies that came in to our battalion. And our battalion was downtown Tokyo. And whatever it was, whether it was bread or ice cream or toilet paper or guns or ammunition or film or cameras or whatever it is, and we had to have a lot of that to supply the people involved with the war crimes trials, because they all had to have headsets. They took a lot of pictures. That was where I got involved with the colonel. I had to go to him to get the requisitions signed to obtain the film from wherever it came from. I don't know where that was, probably the States. And all the stuff had to go through us. We were the battalion supply. Anything a battalion wanted, we had to supply it.
Now, how many soldiers were you working with there?
Oh, the whole battalion, I don't know. I'm not...
I mean, with the group that you were with there at the warehouses?
The group that I was with. There were 8 of us, plus the officer and 1 civilian who worked part-time bookkeeping, recording the various things that I'd put on an inventory.
Right. Now, who was in charge of the American soldiers that you were with?
The captain that was the supply officer.
Okay.
In our little world out there on the island. Who he reported to, I really don't know.
Right. But did you report to him, or did you have other guys above you? Or
no, I reported directly to him.
Okay.
He was almost like one of us. He lived there in the buildings with us. We contrived an area in one of the buildings that we closed in and made it more or less mosquito-proof.
Well, was your captain somebody who had come out of civilian life into the Army, or did you have the sense that he was somebody who would be in the Army a long time?
God, I don't know. He was an older gentleman, probably what I was then called middle-aged, probably in his 50s. So I don't know if he was a career person or you never knew in a case like that anyway, because some of the guys come in as greenhorns and went up the ranks faster, and you wondered how. And other ones were, like the sergeant I mentioned that I run into in Tokyo. He was an old timer. He was probably older than our captain. So I don't know. I was a young kid. I didn't ask a lot of dumb questions. I just did what I was told.
Right. Okay. You talked a little bit about the duties and so forth that you had. Now, did you get to go off the island regularly and deliver things places, or?
We had one member of our group was a truck driver. Anything that went off the island, pretty much, he delivered. Things that came on the island, some of the things he brought in, and some of them other trucks driven by other members of the military, not from our immediate. Like if you needed something, I can't think of anything offhand that would be a good example, but the engineers might bring something in, the various branches might deliver things that come into their category that our battalion needed that had to go through us. If that helps any.
Okay. So most of the work that you were actually doing there, that was sort of fairly routine, checking things in and out and so forth.
Yeah, typical paperwork, inventory control, and being able to show on paper, this came in and went in this, our warehouses were all numbered, and certain ones had different type items. In our immediate warehouse is where all the guns and ammo were, and they were locked up. And you had to be able to show on paper where this was to cover your tail.
Right. Okay. Now, did you get much of a chance to go off the island and explore around in Japan and see some things?
Well, as it says in there, I worked a 5-day week, and it was almost like a civilian job, actually. We had no spit and polish. We were 5 miles from our center of operation. We had a job to do. We did it, and which goes back to this colonel that I had to go and see to get the requisitions signed for the film. It was the first time that I had to do this, and I was told by the supply captain there in our unit where to go and who to see and so forth. So I went to this building and found his office, and I went in and gave him a big salute like you're supposed to. And he said to me, "You the new boy from the 71st?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Let me tell you something. You can forget that salute and while you're in here, we got a job to do and we're here to do it." He says, "You see me out on the street, you got to salute. The Army bulletin says so."
Right.
But that gives you an idea of their attitude. They were there to do a job and they did it. The spit and polish was not first and foremost like it is in basic training.
Yeah, and it probably depended a lot on what unit you were with and what kind of duty you had.
That's true. I imagine that got...
If you were in MacArthur's headquarters, it might be something a little different.
Yeah, right. If you were in MacArthur's office or office building or something like that, it might have been a different ball game. I don't know, but I was glad I wasn't there.
All right. Now, you did know somebody who did some driving for MacArthur's headquarters or that sort of thing.
Well, one of his drivers was an acquaintance that you. When you're in a foreign country alone, anybody that talks to you is the buddy.
Right.
So that's about what it boiled down to. He wasn't anybody I knew. He wasn't anybody I had a lasting relationship. When we were transferred out to the island, I never saw him again.
But in the meantime, you did get over to MacArthur's residence or something like that?
Yeah, I was there 2 or 3 different times, and this one time he took me into the garage area and showed me the Cadillac, and we just shot the breeze like young guys will do.
All right. Now, you said you have sort of a 5-day-a-week job, and then on the weekends, what would you do?
On the weekends, there's a little story I shouldn't be putting on camera, so I'll try and revamp it. But on weekends, our captain would say, "Ed, if you want to use the Jeep, it's yours for the weekend." So I would take a little journey every weekend, and usually 1 or 2 guys with me, never always the same. And we'd go to places like one weekend we went to Fuji. That's about the longest drive we went on. That's something that I'm glad I did, and I wouldn't want to miss it if I'd known what it was like. Fujiyama, some people call it Mount Fujiyama, but that's like saying that you do it quick and fast. It's a double meaning. Fujiyama means Mount Fuji, and we went there, and it's a great attraction for the natives. They venerate that more so than we did. The only thing we found out that after you get up about 5,000 feet, it's kind of hard to make a camp stove burn. Not enough oxygen. You had to blow on it. But other than that, it was just a pleasant weekend trip. When I found these women thrashing rice, that was one of my Sunday trips. I went down a little trail. They all have bicycles, And a lot of them have a little two-wheel trailer on their bicycle. So you got a narrow trail in place of a road. Well, the Jeep was narrow enough we could go down those trails, and a lot of times we did. And that's how we run across those old women thrashing rice. And we'd do things like that every Sunday, and we got to see a little of the native life by doing that.
Okay. Now, in general, how did the Japanese civilians seem to treat you? I mean, you mentioned the incident in the church where they all got out of your way.
Well, once they realized that we were there to do a job and not to do any more conquering,
Mm-hmm.
the Japanese civilians were quite cooperative. They didn't hug and kiss you or anything
Mhm.
like that, but they didn't give you any trouble. And usually if you'd ask directions, they would point you in the right direction, and they were quite cooperative. One of my Sunday trips was to Ueno Park, U-E-N-O, Ueno Park.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a high-class place prior to the war, but of course the war changed everything for everybody, here and there both. And there was a Japanese boy there, I would guess probably 20 to 30 years old, with a pad and a pencil, and he could speak enough English, so he'd say, do your portrait, 15 yen? Ah, so, yeah. So he did mine. I should have brought it up here. I've got it downstairs. And 15 yen was the equivalent to $1
Mm-hmm.
at that time. Now, of course, it's totally different. And there were a few people like that that made a little commercial endeavor out of the conquering heroes, but you can't blame them for that.
All right. Now, another thing you mentioned in your kind of written account here is, I guess, running into some Australians.
Oh, yeah. And you don't call them limeys.
No, those are English.
I saw a guy get punched in the face one day for doing that. They call themselves Australians.
Mm-hmm.
I can't pronounce it the way they do, but that's how they do it. And I don't know how we got in contact with them, but our 8 guys entertained a half a dozen of them one weekend at our place, and they slept in sleeping bags on the floor. And so naturally they had to return the favor. We had to go and visit them on their ship, and we did. And they showed us all through the ship, and us ground troops learned a lot about troops that don't
Mm-hmm.
act on the ground. And the thing that struck me is for Sunday morning breakfast, we had beans and franks. And I told my daughter-in-law from England about that, and she says, that's normal.
All right. And then another thing that you mentioned here is seeing at some point a cannon that was mounted on a rail car or something like that.
Oh,
Japanese one.
yeah, that was one of my Sunday trips. We went down a back trail, apparently where we shouldn't have been, and we run across this cannon that was pointed out over the ocean. And it was on a bluff, of course, and going into that bluff was a little narrow gauge railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And you go back in the trail. We didn't go all the way back because we didn't know what we were getting into, but we went back in there far enough to know that there was little freight cars loaded with ammunition
Mm-hmm.
that was ready to pull out to that cannon.
Right.
And I was glad that we found it when it wasn't in use.
Mm-hmm.
And we went back and told the captain about it the next morning. He got whiter than a sheet. He got on the phone to the engineers, and they were out there in less than an hour. went to work on that thing and dismantled it, and away it went.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine there were other locations
Yeah.
equivalent to that. I don't think that was the only one
Oh,
on
no.
the island.
That was part of the reception that was waiting for you if you're
Yeah,
going to
that would
invade.
have been our greeting. And it just happened that we stumbled across it by being where we shouldn't have been.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the intrigue of our little Sunday jaunts.
Mm-hmm.
That way we got to see a little of the countryside and a little of the people involved. It wasn't that same Sunday, but on another Sunday we were in a little offbeat place, and they had these Japanese trucks. Their vehicles were probably 25 years old, most of them at that time, and they had little charcoal stoves mounted on the back bumper or somewhere in the back, and that was what powered the things.
Right.
And this old truck was loaded with slate roofing tile. It was heavy stuff, and they had backed off a cement along the edge of the street, a kind of a raised curb.
Mm-hmm.
They had backed over that. They couldn't get enough punch out of
Right.
that little charcoal burner to pull back up out of there. So I backed the Jeep up to the front bumper of the truck, and I tried to tell these civilians, get me a rope. They had no idea what I was saying. So I went like this, from our bumper to their bumper and back again. And the one old Japanese, aso. He knew what I meant. So they went and got an old hemp rope that I didn't think was going to hold, but it did. And I hooked onto that thing and just gave them enough help so they could get up over that hump. Then they were all right.
Mm-hmm.
And when we left, going down the street of this big town of maybe 70 population, they all seemed to be following us, bowing and saying, arigato, arigato, domo arigato. Many thanks, in other words. And that tickled me.
All right. Now, are there other miscellaneous incidents or things that tend to come back to you that you haven't mentioned here yet? I think you've kind of covered pretty well what you had in your written notes.
No, I tried to think as I went through that, and from 1946 until 2009, it takes a lot of remembering.
That's right. Okay. Well, then, can you tell me a little bit about your leaving then? Because eventually you get your orders, you get to ship out. Does your whole unit leave together, or do you go out individually?
You went out by length of service and points.
Mm-hmm.
If you had kids, you had more points. I didn't, of course. But you went out according to that routine, however they had it set up. And I don't think there was any other means of testing. The length of time that you'd been in service, the length of time you'd been overseas, and any points for dependencies.
Right. So basically, you got an individual set of orders that said
Yeah.
that you were going to leave,
Yeah.
and your unit was staying
Out
there.
of the 8 guys, there'd probably be only 1 or 2 that would leave at a time. I can only recall one case where 2 left at a time.
Mm-hmm. Now, when they left, did they get replaced, or did you get...
We suppose they did. I don't know. It wasn't really our concern.
Right. Well, I meant if somebody
But I
left before
imagine
you...
they had to replace them because the same work had to be done tomorrow as what was done yesterday.
Right. But if guys left the unit before you did, then somebody else came to
Oh
replace
yes,
them.
yes, they were
Okay.
replaced by younger people.
All right. Now, you were working with this larger team of Japanese personnel. Now, how did they respond when they found out somebody was leaving?
They in most cases that I had anything to do with or knowledge of, the Japanese would give you presentos, and apparently things that meant something to them, but not necessarily meant a great deal to us. But you had to appreciate the fact that they did it. So they're kind of treasures.
Mm-hmm. All right. I don't know, what was the, I don't know, the best thing that you brought out of Japan with you? It wasn't necessarily one of those presents, but did you get a tea set or something like that?
Boy, how do I answer that?
Well, you mentioned that you, this fellow, one of the guys that you worked with, helped you find a Noritake tea set.
Helped with what?
To find a Noritake tea set?
Oh, yeah. One of our Japanese laborers got me the Noritake tea sets. Of course, I had sent them home probably 6 months before I left there.
Mm-hmm.
As far as anything of value that they gave me when I left would be these things here, the parasol and this funny little cigarette holder. And, otherwise, it's mainly pictures of their heroes or deities or whatever the case may, the right word might be to fit the situation. Apparently things, well, now another thing they gave me, several of them gave me various little medals. Some of them with a cloth tab with a medal hanging down from it, something that apparently meant something to them, but I don't really know what the meaning is. I've often wished I could find somebody that married a Japanese that I could show these things to and have them explain to me, because I never really understood the sentiment or value or what that they might have had in mind, but yet you got to appreciate the fact that they did it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, when you finally leave, then, do you go back on another troop ship or some other way?
We came home on, I was told it was a converted LST, but I'm not sure that was true. There's so much that you hear in a group of guys like that that you don't know what to believe. The name of it was the Marine Swallow. And as I understand it, 2 days after we docked in Oakland, California, it was decommissioned as a troop ship. It was operated by merchant marines who were lazy, did nothing good. The ship was dirty. A few of the merchant marines got thrown in the brig on the ship because they were shooting craps with some of the soldiers and they were using loaded dice. That's the kind of people they were. Mostly non-American or come from American possessions, but they weren't the 48 type Americans. So I don't know. I tried not to be judgmental, but it sure didn't compare at all with the ship we went over on. I can't remember who the ship we went over on was manned by. It almost seems like it was Merchant Marines. No, not Merchant Marines. Coast Guard.
That's possible.
I believe the one we went over on was a Coast Guard ship. The one we came back on was a Merchant Marine ship, and that was dirty. But the one we went over on, they were painting yardarms and got their what do you call those things that make so much noise that chip off the old dried on paint, whatever it was. They had those out there chipping the bad spots out of the paint and repainting them. They were working all the time, but not on the way back.
Yeah, it would be Navy or Coast Guard. They would do that. The crews were always doing something, and that was part of what they do as a routine. Yeah, and the Merchant Marine wouldn't work that way.
Plus the fact they had a ship that they were going to use next week, where this tub that we came back on, I don't think that was ever used again.
Yeah. All right. Now, once you get back to the States, you get to Oakland, California. Now, where do you go someplace else to get discharged, or what happens?
Well, we got back to Oakland, and after we had our meal, we were set free for the evening, and most of us went to the PX. I bought a box of 24, back in those days, 5-cent Hershey bars. When I sat down and ate 6 of them. I hadn't had one for almost 2 years, and I indulge myself.
Yeah. What had they been feeding you in Japan? Were you getting just regular army rations, or?
Pretty much so, yeah.
Yeah.
However, being battalion supply, the rations came into us and we dispersed them to the rest of the company in the battalion. So we could pick out what we wanted and cooked it ourselves at our warehouse.
All right. At this point, that tape is up. Believe it or not, you filled. Story here of your visit to Japan. I want to see if, let's see, I'm holding this. Okay, there, one can see a little bit. There's a little bit of glare from the window, but this is what the Japanese artist had drawn there. So I guess he did a pretty good job. All right. Now we had gotten your story. We had gotten you back basically to the States. You'd made it to Oakland, and then from there, did you get discharged back at Fort Sheridan, or?
From there, we went by train. I never understand why we took Southern Pacific instead of Central Pacific, but I didn't make the decisions. We went by Southern Pacific back to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and that was my point of separation.
Mm-hmm.
That was where I was separated. However, the discharge was not effective for 30 days,
Right.
because I had unused leave time.
Mm-hmm.
So my official discharge on my paperwork is December 15th of 46, where I was actually home the 16th of November of 46.
All right. Now, once you got back home again, did you go back to work right away, or what did you do?
Let me think. I got back home in November. I was working before Christmas. I remember that because I was quite surprised when I got a $20 bill for Christmas from my new employer.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been there more than a month. I know that, probably not that long. So that's one thing that I do remember that connects with the date.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you doing farm work again, or something else?
No, I went to work for Medical Arts Pharmacy,
Mm-hmm.
something that was totally foreign to me, except for the fact that I went to work in stock control, the same as I had been doing in the Army.
So you just answered an ad, or how did you get that job?
I guess I answered an ad,
Mm-hmm.
if I can remember that long ago.
All right. Well, now, did you stay in that kind of work, or did you go and do other things?
No, I spent 30 years as a drug pusher, I always say. Because I worked in the drug business, I worked for 2 different retail and 1 wholesale operation, doing the same thing, handling orders from doctors and hospitals and whatnot, doing basically the same thing in a different level is what I did in the Army. And I must have been good at it because the last job I had, I was on it for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, to look back on the whole experience now, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you? Was it just an interruption in your life, or did it change things?
I think I grew up some. Doesn't everybody between 21 and 23 grow up some? I've always jokingly made the statement that back in the old days, you always, when you turned 21, you would say, well, I'm my own boss now. Now I guess it happens at any age, but I always jokingly said, I became my own boss while I was in the Army, ha ha ha. Because that's the farthest thing from the truth, but
Right.
I became 21 while I was in the Army. I was 20 when I went in, and May, and of course the following month I turned 21.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the whole experience is the way things were going before I went in. I had to kiss somebody's hand, and I've always said to my kids and my wife and whatnot, I never enjoyed being in the Army, but it was better than kissing somebody's hand.
What do you mean by kissing somebody's hand? You had to.
You gotta agree with everything the boss says,
Mm-hmm.
and not create any waves, and get the short end of the stick in a lot of cases. And, I had gone through that in order to get deferments, and finally I said it isn't worth it. Heck with them. I'll take whatever comes. And I did, and I lived through it, and tongue in cheek, lived happily ever after.
You made it this far,
Yeah.
and you tell a good story.
Next month I'll turn 85 if I live that long, and I look back and think, why am I so old? None of my relatives were that old. My mother died before she was 80. My father died before he was 75. Must be the good die young. What's my excuse?
I don't know. Any number of things. But anyway, I'm certainly glad you're still here to tell me the story, and just want to thank you for taking the time to do it.
Well, I hope it's of some value.
Yeah. Well, okay.